So I went to the big tournament this year.
Oh, really? Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah, I know. It's loud.
I did 3 to 1.
Yeah, I think you're
Hit
great.
bullet
Yeah.
point.
Very good.
Oh, we started off non-firm. Still not ready to get that conference about that.
Shoot, you're at Ship Park.
I thought you were stopping the freshman.
That's what you need to do, Michael Jordan stuff.
No, I don't think I will get to do it, but they did take us.
They got the. I think they do a lot of stuff.
Like
They-
family
not anyone's
contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have one guy. His name's like Fred Sperling. He does all the celebrity clients.
Okay.
But they did take everyone out to my
Commercial
local
litigator
steakhouse.
to the stars.
Yeah.
Oh, to the what?
To his steakhouse.
Oh, really?
My local steakhouse, and I wasn't able to go because I wasn't. It was like after they had like made an offer, so I was down to him. And apparently he was there, like when they took, like he was like a couple tables over, and I was like, man.
I met a guy last weekend at a family party kind of thing from my wife's family. But, he represents Dominic's in various things, but in the litigation that they have against them, against them. So he is like. Because I remember seeing him at some point on like Chip Hart represented him, or your guy represented him. That's cool. I think he tells people from home.
I think he also
Like, oh
does.
yeah, my friend represents
Yeah.
Michael Jordan.
I think he also does. Was it Stedman, like Oprah Winfrey's boyfriend?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's also that guy.
110,000 people. Yeah. Chicago lawyers can do personal rights.
Are they doing a real day
Yes. Some of that.
Is that going to be cool?
So what?
I
I think so. It's helping the parents, talking to parents and seeing if they can run the individuals or other schools that can like, send influence, just to make sure they're being fine and essentially take complaints so we can move them along to higher ups.
So any desire to go back to it, or do any alumni events or anything?
Yeah, I'll go back. I mean,
It's some parents that are saying this is ridiculous. They're gonna take their kids to their own.
it's fun. It's like I have.
But no one comes be there.
I've been there, we're not so. I have one cousin who goes to and
I mean, how many are
but I have
We've had like, I mean,
Another
I don't
cousin.
know if it's talking total, but we've had
lives
like
out just outside Champaign.
Champaign.
Like I went to high school. I went to high school in northern Illinois.
We're not gonna
like
support or like help.
she is. She ended up moving down there and we were close and
Just don't do that stuff.
So
Welcome to the very last Philly seminar of the summer. You guys made it, good job. I know a lot of interns are already done. Some of you fellows are just getting started, and that's great. We're really glad that you could all be here with us today for our very last seminar. Couple things. Please remember to sign in if you haven't already. We'd like to know who's here. And also, this being our last seminar, whatever sodas you drink, our sodas you don't have to carry back to the office with us. So please have 4 or 5 or put them in your purse or whatever you do. Julia and I would greatly appreciate that. I do have some general housekeeping things before we get to our program today. The first is all Phillies interns and fellows should have gotten emails asking you to fill out a service tracking form. Has anyone not heard of a service tracking form before? You probably are really sick of hearing about service tracking forms. But service tracking forms are really important. They tell us what kind of clients you're working with, what kind of work you're doing, and then we in turn tell our funders so that they continue to feel convinced that this program is important and continue to give us money or even more money. So please do fill out your service tracking forms. There's one for the first half and one for the second half of your time. For most people, first half is May and June, second half is July and August, but for some people it's not. So ignore the May, June, July, August if it's not applicable. Just think first half, second half. So please do fill those out. We also have sent out evaluations to the Philly interns so far. We haven't sent out the fellow evaluation, but we'll do that soon. That's different from service tracking. We're not asking you to report on numbers, we're asking you to report on, you know, what your supervision was like, what your placement was like, things like that, to help us determine if there are things we need to work on with our agencies or things we need to improve our lunches, for example. So those are important for you to do too. These are all confidential, so if you tell us like something was wrong or weird at your agency, we're not going to go back to your agency and be like, wow, Sarah told us that. Good. I don't know. We won't name names, it's not going to be like that. But they are not anonymous. We do want your name on them. That also means that if you don't fill it out, we'll know you didn't fill it out, and we'll email you repeatedly until you fill it out. So, service tracking forms and evaluations, please do those. We do have one more event. This is our last educational lunch, but we do have a reception that's happening this week on Thursday. We just found out it's going to be at Goldberg Cone. One of our board members is at Goldberg Cone. And the information is on our website. We just found out yesterday that Illinois Supreme Court Chief Justice Thomas Kilbride will be joining us for at least the first part of it. So I know many of you got a chance to meet him at our pro bono reception back in June. If you didn't get to meet, he felt bad they didn't get to say hello to everyone. So if you wanted to come back to another Philly event, and this is our very last possible opportunity. So he'll be there on Thursday. If you want to come, please RSVP like as soon as this is done, or now on your phone or something, just so we can get a count to Goldberg Cone so they know how many people to have drinks and appetizers for. We're going to also have some Philly alumni there to talk about their experience in pro bono and other things, so we would love to have you guys join us. Let's see. If it comes to be like September and October and you start going through like Philly withdrawal, like you're really miss Michael telling you to RSVP or something, don't worry. We do have a whole Philly alumni network, and actually our two speakers today are both Philly alumni. Philly Alumni Network has lots of events, and one of our events is the Philly Alumni Reunion that we have every year in October. This year it's going to be on October 16th, and it's at Haymarket out in West Loop. I don't know if you guys know Haymarket. It's pretty great. It's lots of fun. Tickets will go on sale in September. We always offer very discounted tickets to current law students or to people who work in nonprofits or to really anyone who wants a discount ticket. But it's a fun event. We get a lot of Philly alumni there, and it's going to be a good time. So if you're missing Philly by October and you want to reconnect with us, we hope it comes to that. There are other ways to stay connected, like Facebook and LinkedIn. I know some of you already follow us on those social media things. So please do that, because as fall comes along, we'll miss you too, and we would love to hear from you. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for. We're getting a new website and a new brand and everything, so things might be really exciting. If you get newsletters and you don't immediately recognize the logo, it's okay, it's still Philly. I think those are all the housekeeping things I have for you. Service tracking forms, evaluations. Oh, one more thing. We do have places for intern and fellow representatives on our board every year. It's for people who are in Chicago. They serve for 2 years as a representative from your class to our board. The application period has closed for interns, but it's still open for fellows through the end of this week, I believe. So fellows who are interested in serving on a police board have about a 15-member board of directors, lots of leaders from law firms in the area. If you're interested or if you want to apply, you should have gotten an email about it. If you are still curious, you can email me and I can fill you in on any details for that. Yep.
Is the event on Thursday just for Philly intern fellows?
Yeah, thanks for asking, actually. Because it's a space-limited thing, and because it's a donated cost thing, we limit that much to East Phillies. Although, I mean, you don't ever awesome. Fellows can apply to be on the board. I hope you can come Thursday RSVP as soon as possible, and please stay connected. Come to our event in October. All the best with everything. So now we're going to move on to our program for today, which is issues involved in representing you. We have two wonderful speakers, both of whom are Philly alumni, as I mentioned, and that was not even planned. It just so happened that these two leaders in this area are both Philly alumni. So we have Susan D. Costanza. She's the staff attorney at CVLS. Do you have any CVLS people here today? I should say the last program of the summer is always like the smallest group, and that's fine. I totally respect that. Susan is a staff attorney at CVLS. She was a Philly alum at CVLS back in the day. Is that right? Yeah. And she also serves on Philly's Alumni Network Leadership Council. She is the team leader for our program planning team. And then we also have Margie Wakeland. And she is the staff attorney at Equip for Equality. She had been a Philly intern at Equip for Equality. Perhaps you are noticing a trend. And she was also an Equal Justice Works Fellow. So we're going to do the program today. We'll have some time for questions at the end, hopefully, but I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Great. There's also yeah, please eat leftovers and soda. So, I'm just gonna, Margie and I are both just gonna kind of give you a little bit about, tell you a little bit about ourselves first, and kind of like how we came to be doing what we're doing right now. And then we're going to, just to give you fair warning, we're also gonna have you all have a little bit of a group discussion. So just be prepared, there's gonna be a little bit of participation today. We'll give you some time to think about it before we ask, we're not gonna call on you, but we'd love for you to, volunteer some of your ideas with us. And then we'll kind of dive into sort of in our experience and in our particular practice areas, some of the issues that we've encountered in working and representing you. So, and also just, I kind of don't like the fixed atmosphere of this room. I would generally like maybe sit in a circle and we can have a conversation, everything like that. So feel free to, I would say, please for me, I don't speak for Maureen, but feel free to raise your hand, interrupt, ask questions, or we can always answer questions at the end. So my name is Susan D. Costanza. I'm going to go back. In college, I studied education, and I thought I was going to be an elementary school education teacher. Until near the end of college, I sort of decided that I wanted to do justice on a bigger scale, and I thought that, I read some books about people with big ideas and doing impact litigation, and then I read about the civil rights movement, and I thought that was what I was going to do. I was going to go to law school and make a big difference, do policy or impact litigation or something like that. After college, I did take some time off. I did some teaching internationally. I did some teaching here in Chicago at Chicago Public Schools, but I did kind of make my way to here, to DePaul, to law school. Eventually, kind of similarly with the same idea that I was gonna go and do some big and important work. However, when I got to law school, I did, after my first year of law school, I got an internship at a civil rights organization, and I sort of quickly realized that, as you might imagine, coming from a sort of teaching and direct services background, that was not necessarily something I was really interested in on a practical level. I am kind of, my skills lie in interacting with people interpersonally. I really thought that I decided and realized that I should kind of go on a more, towards a career where I could have more interpersonal interaction. Instead of kind of doing a lot of paperwork and things like that. I think that other work is very valuable, but it's just not really something that is for me. So after that, I started doing other things. I started working here at DePaul in the Career Services Office as a student, and then I also started working with Chicago Volunteer Legal Services as an intern with Philly, and I stayed there for about a year as a law student. One of the things that Chicago Volunteer Legal Services does is we have a number of programs, and one of our programs is that in probate court, the judges there appoint us to act as guardian ad litem for children in contested guardianship cases, and then also for adults in contested adult guardianship cases. And those are the two programs that I actually work on at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services. So I feel like, and I can go into that a little bit more, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about CVLS, but I feel like I get to use all of my skills, my teaching skills, and my enjoyment of kind of spending time with people and kids in the legal setting at CVLS. I feel really lucky that I get to do that. So that's a little bit about me. I do want to tell you a little bit about Chicago Volunteer Legal Services as well. If you haven't heard of us or haven't much interaction with us, we're a relatively small not-for-profit legal aid in Chicago, one of the great legal aids, there's many wonderful legal aids in the Chicago area. Our little niche is that we're sort of the largest pro bono organization in the state. And so what that means is that even though we have a staff of only about 12 attorneys, we at any given time are working with 2,000 to 3,000 volunteer attorneys to take pro bono cases with us on a volunteer basis. So I spend about half of my time working on my own cases, but I also spend about half of my time both training attorneys to take new kinds of cases they haven't taken before through our programs, and then kind of supporting them along the way as they work through their cases. I have, in the back, I brought little pamphlets so that you can get up on the way out and have a look at kind of the opportunities at CVLS. My area of expertise is going to be all probate work, all guardianship work, but I'm happy to connect you with other people if you're interested in adoptions or family law.
I'm sure you've probably heard, there's a giant foreclosure mediation program in Cook County, and that different legal aids kind of have different pieces of that mediation. So we have a big chunk of that. Many of our attorneys work on that kind of work. So if you have any questions about legal aids, we have to talk to you about that. That's just a little introduction to me and what I do. And then,
Are you gonna say more about legal aids?
I'll talk more about my program. Hi, thanks a lot for coming out today. I'm Margie Wakeland, and I'm a staff attorney at Equip for Equality. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Equip for Equality and what I do in the special education clinic. But before, as Susan did, I wanted to give you a little bit of sense of where I'm coming from. Similar to Susan, actually. I was a teacher right after college, and for 3 years I was a special education teacher down south. And in doing that work, I taught high school special ed, so to students who were in self-contained classrooms where they got all of their instruction in the classroom, and I also provided instruction to students who were going to some of the freshman English or U.S. history, making sure that they were getting the accommodations that they needed to be successful. And in doing that, in teaching special education, I'm not sure how many of you are really that familiar with it. I know that our great interns and former interns but there are a lot of laws around special education, and even as a teacher, part of my certification process was learning a very shallow understanding of that law, but in order to implement it. And what I saw in the work was that by the time the kids got to me, they had sometimes 10 years of really flagrant violations of this law that had led to the point where when they were in high school they couldn't read with sort of basic learning disabilities, and didn't really have the skills to go on to college, but also even to get gainful employment in a competitive situation. So as many special education teachers, part of your job is interacting with the families and working with them to try and make sure that their students' needs are addressed. I got to know a lot of the parents of my students, and I really thought that I'm not sure what led me to law school exactly, but I sort of remember doing like a Google search. It might have even been like a Yahoo search. This is a while ago, and I found that there was an attorney who was working in New York who was doing something called, he had a project called for least restrictive environment, making sure that students with disabilities were not being relegated to segregated schools, but were actually getting the instruction they needed in their schools so that they could be a part of that community. And I thought, well, that's exactly what I want to do. I better go to law school. So fast forward a couple of years after taking the LSAT, and that's so grueling, I was at Northwestern. I started. So I came in, unlike probably 99% of the people who enter law school, with a really clear vision of what I wanted to do, which was be an attorney representing parents, low-income parents, at a legal aid organization. And I went to my career services and said, this is what I want to do. And they said, well, there are a lot of private firms that do that. And we thought about that, and I was like, well, they don't provide this type of representation, most of those private firms, for free, and that's what I really want to do. So I think maybe it was even by looking at the PILI website that I was connected with Equip for Equality. And when I first interviewed in order to, so this was in my second year, the first summer I worked at a similar organization, Equip for Equality, that was in New York. But when I first interviewed for my PILI internship, it was when Equip for Equality was sort of a general organization that represents people with disabilities from age 0 to 99. But they hadn't split up into the 3 teams that they've split up to now. And so they hadn't created at that point the special education clinic. And so I was signing on to work for this organization that I felt committed to, that I understood I may have the opportunity to do some special education work,
but I'd probably mostly be representing adults with disabilities in a variety of different civil rights cases. And then, lo and behold, when I got there, they had just created this special education clinic, which seemed like it was created specifically for me, and it was the perfect opportunity, and it was because of Pili that I got there, so I'm very grateful. And while I was there, I started doing the kind of work that I wanted to do in terms of representing these families that really were sort of, they've been having, a lot of them are in crisis in terms of not feeling like their children are learning anything in school and just not feeling like they have anywhere to turn. So after I finished law school, I started at Equip for Equality with an Equal Justice Works Fellowship. And I believe, have you had a program on fellowships? Okay. The Equal Justice Works Fellowship is the largest, I believe, postgraduate fellowship for people who are early in their career. The most traditional way to start it is straight out of law school, but there are other people who will maybe do a clerkship or will start working in some other type of setting, and then we'll start this 2-year fellowship where you get to design your dream job. And that was perfect for me because I really have been able to, in law school, by working at Equip for Equality and working at my school's clinic, I've really been able to figure out what it was that I exactly wanted to do. So I started at Equip for Equality with that Equal Justice Works Fellowship, and now I'm continuing now, and that was 5 years ago that I started. So now let me just give you a brief overview, and this is going to be very boring for our interns who are here, but so this, some of you probably know what special education law is, but most of you probably don't. So Portia, I've changed the name. Portia is a typical client for Equip for Equality, and she was actually someone who I first met the summer I was doing my Pili internship. And when she came to us, she actually came to us through, we have a program at Equip for Equality with the Cook County Juvenile Probation Office. So kids who get involved in the court system sometimes for truancy, for delinquency, and for whatever reason, if they have someone identifies that they may have an educational need, they get assigned an education advocate through the court. And then we work with those advocates for when they do their advocacy on behalf of the child or the youth. And if they get to the point where they're just hitting a brick wall in terms of the work they can do, they contact us, and we will take over the case at that point. And Portia's case was one like that. So she had some pretty significant red flags in terms of she was 18 years old. She was in Chicago Public Schools, just moving along year after year. Everything's great, but she couldn't read whatsoever. I'm not sure if this says it, but no, it didn't. When she came to us, she didn't even know all of her letters, and I believe she already had 2 children when she came, but she said to us, my primary goal is that I want to be able to read stories to my child. I can't do that. They want to read, they want me to read this, and I don't even know all the letters. And so she came and we did our initial intake interview and then recognized, whoa, this is really serious, and something needs to be done. She can't just be in this typical school program where she's not learning anything, and she's being taught biology, but she doesn't even know how to read the textbook whatsoever. So we started representing her, and it was that summer that I was a Pili, and then we requested an administrative hearing, the due process hearing, which is the main vehicle that parents have to challenge if they disagree with the education that their child is getting in school. And so we requested that due process hearing, and I was able to, during my third year of law school, come back to help represent the team at the due process hearing. And we were successful. She was placed in a program, an actual school that's for students like her who have severe learning disabilities. Because what's really even more sad is that she didn't actually have a cognitive impairment, or it was just that she had a really severe learning disability, and teaching her how to read was going to be much more difficult than teaching probably most of us here how to read. So we represented her, and this is a pretty similar scenario to a lot of the cases that we get. And this is old. We wrote this a while ago. She's actually doing a lot more than just reading 3-letter words, although that was pretty huge. And I was a reading teacher, so I know how significant that sort of first hurdle was. But for her, that was just even knowing that she was starting to make progress with her reading was significant. So actually, another good point about Portia is that might be relevant for you who are Pili Fellows, is that we won the due process case, but there was one issue that the hearing officer we thought got wrong. And the way that these cases are appealed is they're appealed to federal district court. That's the first level, and then they can go to appeal to the Seventh Circuit. So we disagreed with the hearing officer on that one point, so we turned to one of our pro bono partners, and like CBLS, Equip for Equality works a lot with pro bono law firms. We have 17 firms that we work with. So we turned to them, Kirkland and Ellis, and said, would you help us with this appeal? We're going to be doing some more of our direct cases, but this would be a great opportunity for your younger attorneys to start to get into federal court. So they took over and did a fantastic job, and the error that the hearing officer had was corrected. So. Okay, so I sort of mentioned Equip for Equality a little bit. Equip for Equality is the state's protection and advocacy system. So every state has one organization that receives federal funding. The work that we do is actually mandated by a federal law. And so we in Equip for Equality in Illinois, we're independent of state government. We are independent of the federal government, although we do rely on their funding. And we represent adults and children with disabilities in all types of civil rights cases. We don't do things like, and sometimes this can be confusing for a lot of our clients, like just because you're a person with a disability, we don't do a divorce, or we don't do just sort of general legal cases. But if it involves civil rights that have been targeted for us to provide representation, for example, special education cases, then we do represent. And we have 3 practice areas. So special education clinic, the abuse investigation unit, which is actually an interesting part of our mandate from the federal government, is that we need to make sure that people who are living in institutions, people with disabilities, are being free from abuse and neglect. So we actually go out when we receive reports. We actually have attorneys who go out and do investigations and then issue reports about what happened, and then perhaps, depending on the severity, they may bring cases against them, or they may work to try and close some of those facilities that are just frequently violating and abusing people with disabilities. And we also have our civil rights team, which is our largest team, which is focused on, they do community integration, self-determination, and anti-discrimination. So a lot of ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act work. And then we also, I think Equip for Equality is great because we do both direct services. We also do impact litigation, class actions, and public policy work. We have a small public policy team. And we, actually all parts of the team do similar to CBLS. We do a lot of trainings for bono attorneys, but then also for people with disabilities and the people who serve people with disabilities or work with them. So as I said, the special education clinic is pretty new. And The reason why it was created was because there was, and I'm not sure if Hilly was involved in this, but probably had some sort of hand in it, but there was a legal needs study that was done by here in Chicago of or not just Chicago, actually, Illinois. So it was a study that was a comprehensive study done of low-income people in Illinois to try and identify what their legal needs were. And I think it was actually 92% of people in Illinois, low-income people, who had an education problem. So they identified, I have an education problem, and they were not able to get any sort of representation. So 92%, that's a pretty significant number. We also found, Equip for Equality found that we, at that point, and this was even before we started the special education clinics, we just had some attorneys who were working in this area, that we were handling over 50% of the education cases. So we knew that we weren't doing that much. And so if we were doing over 50%, then there was really a huge need for this. There were, and there are, private attorneys who will represent families, but those cases can sometimes, the administrative hearings can cost $50,000, $70,000, so they're prohibitive for most people. The other thing that's important is that for special education, when in Illinois, when parents have legal representation, they were, they only have legal representation. So this is in actual administrative hearing, which is sort of a mini trial, and can take, on average, they're around 5 days. Most of the ones that I've done have involved around 20 witnesses and 2,000 pages of documents. So, I mean, they're pretty complex. It's supposed to be a system that's designed to be parent-friendly, but it isn't. And so, in these hearings, parents only had representation 44% of the time, and school districts had representation 94% of the time. And without an attorney, parents prevailed only 20% of the time. And with an attorney, parents prevailed nearly 50% of the time. So what Equip for Equality found, or sort of started to see, is that attorneys can really level the playing field for families. We're not saying that we're going to win every time, but we at least want the families not to be sort of counted out because of some legal procedure that they didn't follow. And I think, in Illinois, to be fair, hearing officers, the State Board of Education trains them. They do give some leeway to parents, but talking to parents about how to present evidence, it can be very confusing. And so it's important that they have representation. So we created the special education clinic. At this point, I think this is accurate. We have 8 attorneys and 3 fellows. So we have 2 Equal Justice Works fellows, and then 1 Skadden fellow, which is another, who's just starting in a couple weeks, which is another one of those postgraduate fellowships. But we also rely on volunteer attorneys, pro bono attorneys, law students. Similar to Susan, I have some materials back there about how to get involved. If you're a Pilley Fellow, you're going to be going to a law firm. We're at 17 of the largest law firms in Chicago, so chances are, hopefully, we have partnerships with your law firm. And if you're interested, that talks about some of the different opportunities we have for getting involved. I'm not going to go over this too much just because this requires, sometimes doing the slide and other trainings takes like 10 minutes just in and of itself because you have to explain everything. But we cover a lot of different issues in special education, in the special education clinic that are priorities for representation. But really overall, like the easiest way to think of it and the way that I break it down for parents is we want to make sure that the kids who are identified as having disabilities, so problems in school due to learning, that they are in school and that they're learning. That's sort of the simple way of describing it, but you'd be surprised on how often they're not in school and learning. So, in the special education clinic, we have a toll-free helpline. Helpline is like, we receive thousands of calls from parents for assistance, and that's our main vehicle for getting assistance to them immediately. We have a 24-hour a policy of trying to get back to them within 24 hours, actually the same day, and then get resources to them that same day. And then that's the vehicle that we use to try and determine if we're going to provide further representation. But the main thrust, because there's only so many of us, is that we give them some self-advocacy assistance, and then if that fails, we'll start getting involved. And so we also, the various levels of assistance, I actually have this on this next slide. So if you were to be an attorney at Equip for Quality, or volunteer with Equip for Quality, or do pro bono work with us, you could do any of these things, which attending, probably the main thing that we get pro bono attorneys to help with is attending school meetings. So they're called IEPs. It's the annual plan that's put in place for the child that sets what they're going to be learning for the next year and how that learning is going to occur. So that's one area that parents can really benefit from having an attorney to help them negotiate for what they need. And we also have pro bono attorneys help, and our attorneys attend school meetings to prevent referrals for expulsion. So a big part of our practice is also representing youth who are being referred, who are their schools are trying to expel them. So those, before they even go to the expulsion hearing, you can attend a meeting, and this is the greatest way to stop that expulsion, to actually negotiate to say, wait, you did something wrong here, you shouldn't be expelling this child. And, or the school meeting could be if the child's getting suspended from school week after week and is not able to learn. Because again, if you think about what I said about our overall goal is to make sure that kids are in school and learning. So if they're getting suspended every week, they're not in school. So then pro bono attorneys help with representing in expulsion hearings, representing in the due process hearings that I was saying that are similar to mini trials. And then we also do federal court appeals. And, you know, that's sort of, those are the general areas that we practice in, or the general types of work that we do in terms of our representation. But, you know, things come up. You have to be willing to, we may go into court on some claim that's not exactly the type of claim that we typically deal with in special education, that is a great way to get relief for the student. So, so this is it. So, do you want to talk about it?
So Marty just told you about like a context of 2 parts, and I'll tell you about our Guardian Ad Litem for Minors programs. Considering the vast is when we talk about special ed law, I always feel like, because we have a little bit of overlap with special ed law, I always feel like all of the attorneys that don't do it, we're always like, it's big, it's complicated, there's many levels of law and things like that. So I will say that our probate law and statute is a pretty small statute, and it's a very kind of limited setting that I practice in, with a lot of overlap from other areas. But basically, Guardian Ad Litem is probably, many of you or all of you know, is an attorney, not always an attorney, but usually an attorney appointed to represent the best interest of the child in whatever context that situation is for. And so in our situation, actually the executive director of Pili sort of turned this program, worked at CVLS, and turned this into like a kind of formal program that we have. So just to jump back for a second, as I mentioned before, CVLS does all sorts of cases. We sort of consider ourselves to be like a general law firm for the poor. So anyone can come in with any kind of legal problem and do an intake with us, and you may or may not be able to represent them. But we have a number of programs. So we work with the probate court. There is the minor guardianship cases where there is not any kind of funds involved. It's just a straight kind of guardianship of the person, of the child only. All take place in one courtroom in the Bailey Center in 1806. And generally, the reason why there might be a guardianship in place is that for whatever reason, a parent or parents are not parenting a child. And so somebody else needs, whoever is caring for the child, needs to have some sort of authority to consent to medical care,
enroll them in school, and do all sorts of other things that a parent would otherwise be able to do. So we are not appointed as guardian ad litem for every single guardianship case that comes through 1806, because there are thousands that go through all the time. But whenever there are two kind of main ways that reasons why we would be appointed to act as guardian ad litem for a child. And the first is that there is, and this is kind of the bulk of our cases, there is a guardianship already in place, and for whatever reason, and a parent either enters a child's life or returns to a child's life and says, I want to parent my child, or and the guardian says no. And so the parent then has to go to court and has the judge to discharge the guardian. The guardian, if they have to give notice to the guardian, the guardian appears in court and says no. The judge may send them to mediation initially to kind of see if they can work it out on their own. May simultaneously, or just skip mediation and say Chicago Volunteer Legal Services is going to be the guardian ad litem. They're going to appoint an attorney to do an investigation and to make a recommendation to the judge about the best interest of the child. There's sort of two levels. The first is that when a parent comes into court and asks the judge to discharge the guardian, they have to show, there's a very low hurdle, show by preponderance of the evidence that there has been a material change in circumstances since the guardian was appointed. And then if they are able to jump over that hurdle and the guardian still says no, they don't want to be discharged as guardian, then the burden shifts to the guardian, and the guardian will have to show by clear and convincing evidence that it's in the best interest of the child that the guardian remain in place. Almost all of our parties are unrepresented. We're generally, the judge and the guardian ad litem are usually the only attorneys in the room. So that's kind of the first main way that our cases come in. The second is just if somebody is caring for a child and comes into court and asks to become guardian of this child or children. Similarly, as you might imagine, they have to give notice to the parent. The parent might show up and object to the guardianship for whatever reason. And so when that happens, it's kind of a similar process. The judge might appoint us to be guardian ad litem. We have, I'm trying to think about, so an investigation includes talking to everybody first, kind of getting a feel for what the story is and what's going on. Usually it's families and family law, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes there could be an unrelated guardian caring for a child that we're working with. And then sort of getting as much evidence as possible to kind of back up and figure out who's telling the truth, and maybe everyone's telling the truth, but kind of like getting as much evidence as we can as possible. And the end result, maybe not initially, but the end result is that we would write a report, or more than one report, and present that report with recommendations to the judge about what we think is going on and what might be in the best interest of the child. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. We'll kind of get into more of it. Does anyone have any questions for us before we kind of move on to the next? Yeah. I can tell you the interactive portion.
Yeah,
I can tell you that's it. The questions,
fun.
yeah,
Interactive.
So when I train people how to be a guardian ad litem, and I'm sure Marty does this in her trainings as well, and working with attorneys, I work, as we both mentioned, we work with attorneys from firms who may or may not have children of their own, who may or may not have any experience working with kids at all, and that's okay. But we sort of do a little brainstorming on how do you engage a child? What's going to be the first thing that you do when you meet with this child that you're supposed to be representing their best interests? So if everyone can pick one or two people near them and just kind of chat about like how do you envision that? You've never done this before, we're not expecting you to have experience, but you're meeting with kids, probably in a law office. What are you going to do to engage them? How are you going to chat with them?
Hey,
Ryan.
Chat for a minute.
You're like your adorable little toys out, right? Crayons.
At least, we try to put them in usage, I guess.
Right.
Maybe to their law function to kids.
I think even like getting down to sometimes like
Right.
getting down to their level, speaking their language. Try to get them talking as much as possible. Because our kids if they're well socialized, they're not forthcoming strangers. There shouldn't be
overly eager, you know, so
They want to like to graduate.
Maybe like talk about yourself. Maybe get like, yeah, like,
right. I guess asking if they understand why they were there, or like that, I don't know.
maybe like ask them like, like tell me like times that you're saying how to describe it.
Yeah,
They're not able to like
right.
I'm so sorry, guys. Thank you for your enthusiasm. This is great. Yeah. Sometimes we're working with people and we're like, oh, you have to interact. We're like, ah. Don't make me trusted. That's great. It's great to see lively conversation. So, if you just want to share about some of your ideas about how, where you can take the kids that is in your, or children that are, or we're going to meet with children, two more than one child at the same time, what are you going to do? What were some of your ideas in engaging children? Or you? You have such a great idea.
Well, we said first you want to establish a connection, something aside from the issue, so they can trust you and feel willing to open up to you.
How would you do that?
Maybe just ask about their interests, like, see what they're wearing, maybe there's some activities, some occasion, like sports, you know.
Great. Other ideas?
We talked about maybe talking in their language and even like going, so like talking at their level and going down to their level. So like if they're like on the floor, maybe try kneeling or going down to their level so you're not like as intimidating to them.
Yeah. Great. Other ideas? How do you introduce yourself? Did you talk about that? You guys were talking. Yeah, I know. You guys want to just share?
Well, no, we weren't.
Well, you guys-
We didn't talk about how to introduce ourselves.
Well, what's an idea?
Our main thing was, you were saying, was just keep asking questions to get them to engage, because they might
What
not be.
questions would you ask?
Just kind of more generic stuff at first, just to get them talking. Is kind of our main thing. Is just, kind of what they said of what your interests, but try to spark something before you get into actually what you're there.
How about, what would be some questions to get an 8-year-old talking, or an 8 to 10-year-old talking?
What'd you do at recess?
Yeah, perfect. School's a good one. Thinking about school. School is a really big
I
part
think
of our life.
one of the things I've encountered is when you're talking with like really young kids, like 4 to 7, they have a hard time describing what they're talking about and letting them draw what they want, or any way to get them to, other than talking, to explain
Great
things.
idea. I always have toys and things ready to do with them, especially like you were saying, like 4 to 7. Once they're going to be able to kind of like do something with you and also talk at the same time. So like finding an activity where they don't have to think about it too much, but they're not like, I'm talking to this strange woman in this awkward sterile office, and she's asking me questions about my hair color, and it's kind of strange. So like so I draw the children. Play Jenga a lot. I play a lot of Jenga. Fantastic games. Play games. Yeah. Other ideas? Do you have any go-to things that you do? You're meeting with a child? Most of the time that I'm meeting with, and actually this is going on to a slide that we're going to talk about, but in our representation, the time when it's most important for us to be engaging the youth is when they're in expulsion hearing, like before leading up to an expulsion hearing. So I would say that I try and see what might be an interest to them, but I also find, and this is mostly dealing with sort of the upper elementary, so middle school kids to high school, they are really interested in knowing that they have rights. So I like to tell them and sort of try and empower them in the fact that they are in control in this situation in terms of our relationship, about what the goals are and what our strategy is going to be. So that's, I find, where they're so used to people telling them what to do, and I'm saying, I'm your lawyer, so I'm here for you, and, you know, your parents out there, but I'm here for you. So I find that can really help them to start feeling more comfortable, because they feel like I'm actually listening to them. Yeah. Thanks, guys. There's lots of other ways to do anything else? No, I mean, I think what you all said you're sort of getting at without maybe kind of giving specific examples, but I think generally sort of start talking about anything at all to kind of make it comfortable. School is a really great go-to thing. But, you know, during the summer, obviously, talk about what they're doing for their summer break, things like that. I have, you know, usually when I do this in a training, kind of break it up into age group, because, you know, the 0 to 4 age range would be really different than the 15 to 18-year-old age range. And my former supervisor always told me that if she ever had a teenage boy come into her that she was going to be meeting with, she'd always be like, oh, so, did you see that game? And the kid would just start talking. And she had no idea what season it was or what game it was. It was just like a great kind of like opener. I always sort of like engage kids in talking about their surroundings, to kind of say, like, you know, most of them have never been in maybe a professional office at all, certainly not a lawyer's office before. So I sort of say, like, hey, this is the lawyer's office. Have you ever been? Do you know what a lawyer is? Have you ever been to a lawyer's office? We look out the windows. We say, you just move. I used to be like, do you know what city you're in? Because the mayor was right across the street. He works right across the street. You show them the window, you know, things like that, like the cars, things like that. So I kind of like talk about anything to get them going. You guys mentioned clothes. It's actually a good thing to notice as well, because I think for me, part of the assessment I'm doing is noticing how they're dressed. Are they dressed appropriately? Especially if they're little, are they being dressed appropriately? If they're older, are they allowed being, you know, allowed to dress inappropriately? Can be another way for that. So yeah, so kind of broad intro to meeting kids. So we're gonna jump into some issues. Oh, here it comes. Okay, it's going to come up, but we can just start talking. So this is the point where we're going to be similar to what we were just doing, talking about some of the issues that come up when you're representing youth. And so there are some like initial ethical issues that you hopefully when you're going to an organization, they've already worked out. But we wanted to, I think those are important because coming from the situation that I am, in terms of this first question about determining who your client is, my work is very different from Susan's work in terms of the client. So in special education cases, the rights are held by the parents when the child is less than 18. And at 18, the student is the person who has the rights, but they can easily in Illinois transfer those rights to their parents. So the majority of the time, the parent is the one who is the legal agent and has the rights to bring these cases. So in anyone who is doing special education representation for purposes of requesting a due process hearing or filing in court is going to, their client for that purpose is the parent. The added sort of trickiness of our organization, Equip for Equality, is that we are, our mandate is to represent people with disabilities in civil rights cases. So we need to represent the interests of the person with a disability, which in this case is the child or the student. So the way that we sort of remedy this, but it does still lead to some questions at times, is that we, in our agreement that we form with the parents, we say if your interests, if what you want differs from what your child wants at some point, and right now we've already talked with your child and we've established that your interests are the same, but if they do at some point come, you want your child to go to a certain school, he tells me there's no way I'm going to that school, I can't go to that school, then we're going to have to not be representing you anymore because because of the conflicts between our organization and then the rights that are in special education. So it definitely becomes, it's in representing children, and I think Susan will talk about how hers works, it does become, it's a little bit different than in other situations where you have a very clear client and you're acting on behalf of that person. So, yeah, so for us, as I mentioned, we actually, I'm sure you know there's kind of different ways to represent children. But one would be just to be a child's rep. And so in some places where you go, you would actually, or in some, even in like a divorce case, there might be an attorney that's appointed or hired to be the child's representative and to actually just advocate for what the child wants. And it's just like any other, except that you have a client who's a child, any other kind of attorney-client relationship. And then you could go to a place like the Cook County Public Guardian where they actually have a dual role. They are both guardian ad litem and representing the children's best interests that they represent, but they're also supposed to be child advocates. So they have this giant balancing act they're constantly kind of doing. And then in our situation, as I said, we're only guardian ad litem, which is good because I always never feel like I have to advocate for something that a 15-year-old wants that I think would be terrible for them. So that makes me feel a little bit better. But it does make things complicated because sometimes that I might have a bit of an adversarial relationship with a child. Usually that doesn't happen, but it can happen. So when I meet with a child or a teenager for the first time, I do usually, it kind of depends on their age, but as they're older especially, I would say I sort of define a relationship a little bit in the negative. I would say to a kid, I'm not your mom's attorney, I'm not your grandma's attorney. My job is to talk to the judge about you. The judge wants to know all about you, and I kind of like talk to them about that. For an older kid, I would tell them, you don't have any kind of attorney-client privilege. Especially with teenagers, you just generally treat them as adults and kind of give them all the information and not kind of hide the ball is usually the best way to go with teenagers. Because they kind of know when you're not being truthful anyway. They would not be truthful with a child, I guess. But when you're not kind of being completely straightforward with them. And so I just sort of tell them that, and then I usually say, however, if there's something you don't want me to, talk about with, or if there's an opinion you want to express that we don't want shared publicly, usually I'm able to do that. And kind of like I do talk to older kids in kind of a nuanced way about that. But as far as younger children, I think it's interesting because a lot of times, as you might imagine, a 5-year-old really it's kind of like a custody case what I do, and so a 5-year-old may or may not even know that it's like it could be up for grabs that they could be moving somewhere at some point in the future. And so like sometimes I don't even end up talking to them about our particular relationship. Sometimes I know a lot, the 5-year-old knows a lot, and that's not always the best thing, but then I will kind of address it. But I think it always is really tricky to kind of like figure out the best way to be clear and honest with kids that you're representing, but also make them feel comfortable and have some trust. So, I have been mostly talking about in terms of the typical special education representation that we will do, but the one time that the student does hold the rights as opposed to the parent is in expulsion hearings, so in expulsion cases. And that's where this second part comes in and is really important for us and what we do, is that it's very important when you're dealing with, even if it's a 14-year-old who seems extremely mature and sort of nods his head like he understands what you're talking about when you're asking him to sign a release so that you can get access to his records from his psych hospital placement. But it's really important that you explain to them using clear language and really actually maybe even some examples, the different things that if you are forming a retainer with that student or having them sign some sort of settlement agreement, that they understand everything that is part of that agreement. And it's very possible, it takes longer to have to go through this all, but it's important, and it's also important in terms of the attorney-client privilege. And I was fortunate enough to, when I was in law school, be for 2 years in a clinic where we really emphasized the empowerment of the youth that we were representing. And so we spent a lot of time role-playing how to explain attorney-client privilege. And that it's important for when you're in order to provide good representation to these youth, that they understand what it means for you to be their lawyer. It's really interesting. I'm finding it really interesting to like think about this, because I think it's interesting that sometimes I feel like in your work you're clearly like trying to give a lot of a sense of control to the kids and things like that. Sometimes I feel like in my work, and it's an entirely different setting, sometimes it's helpful for the child to have a little bit of that responsibility taken off of their shoulders. And so kind of like where you live is not on you, because it's similar to any other, again, court is not always the best tool for families to kind of work out their issues. And so like it's an adversarial process, and the kids really feel that. And families who sometimes otherwise get along sometimes get into court turn crazy. And so a kid that, sometimes will feel relieved when I say, it's not up to you, it's not up to me, it's not up to your mom, it's really not up to grandma, it's up to, the judge. The judge wants to know as much information as possible, but it's really up to the judge in the end. So, you don't have to decide. That kind of, taking that kind of responsibility out of the kid can be helpful sometimes. Yeah. Definitely. So I think in both of our situations when we, so I've explained that if we have a conflict where we won't continue the representation, that sometimes we have to weigh how serious that conflict is. Sometimes a kid will say, a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old will say that they don't want to be in special education, for example. And we need to try and make sure that we're balancing what that child is saying at that moment versus what might be appropriate for. So in special education, it's what is appropriate. In Susan's work, it's what is in the best interest. So, this could be another ethical issue as well, but in terms of making sure that the goals that you have for the representation, if they are being driven by the youth, that they are actually going to be leading to something that's appropriate. And sometimes this just involves having, again, a really, a very real conversation with the youth in order to figure out, what are the motivations for them saying, oh, I don't want to be in special education, but I hate school and I can't do anything in school. And in working out and sort of looking at what is underlying that opinion, you can come to some agreement. And then in guardianship law, as in adoption and abuse of neglect cases as well, when a child hits, usually it's about 14, that's when kind of their opinion is given some official legal weight. So that the actual age makes a difference. But then similarly, I might make a strong case for a 12-year-old who has some really mature thoughts about their situation and what's going on, and I may make a case for the judge that their opinion should be taken into account, even though they haven't kind of reached that threshold yet. Or I might make the opposite argument that a 16-year-old wants this, but it may or may not be in their best interest if they live with dad who is in and out of jail like every 6 months for the past 12 years and doesn't show any signs of kind of like stopping that pattern. So as you might imagine, teenagers frequently live in the least restrictive environment. Not always the best for them. Yeah, and I think we're almost out of time. So most of this is just what we've already talked about in terms of the same strategies that you use to engage youth are really important with working with them. But I'd also because most of the time I'm working with older teenagers, it's important to actually listen to what their concerns are and to value them because there's usually a lot of basis for what they're coming up with and not just dismiss them because they're 14 years old. Yeah. And then just kind of to wrap up, I think anytime you're doing work with kids, maybe anytime you're doing legal aid work, kind of sort of, I feel like a lot of what I do is sort of social worky or case management, a little bit more like case management in that, many of the clients that we work with or families that we work with are very under-resourced, and so connecting them to services that are kind of going to help them succeed and not just kind of addressing that specific legal issue that's on the table is something that, so in our work, when I'm appointing guardian ad litem of a 5-year-old, CDLS is still guardian ad litem for that child until they turn 18. So we have a long relationship with our clients, and so even if we kind of have a particular legal issue addressed for the 5-year-old, I might see that case again when that child is 10 years old. And so in my experience, if we only address kind of the legal issue, frequently the case will come back in 6 months if we haven't kind of helped stabilize other areas of their life. And again, usually I'm not personally the one kind of stabilizing that life, but kind of making sure that either if I feel strongly enough about it, that the judge puts in the order that the child is mandated to services, and that the guardian or parent make that happen, or just kind of like making sure that the families are aware of what's out there for them that are going to help kind of stabilize the child. And then we have a lot of overlap with abuse and neglect kind of generally in guardianship. I mean, if any of you are interested in that, I can kind of let you know how that works. But also just kind of generally working with kids or meeting with kids, the child might reveal something to you that you weren't expecting, or that you might have to address. So that's just kind of another thing. Kids might tell you things, and it's not just abuse and neglect, but kids might tell you things that you're going to have to like think about that are outside of the, we're lawyers and like to keep things in the rules and kind of address things as we're supposed to be addressing them within the structure of the law and the case and everything like that. And sometimes when you work with kids, especially, people are kind of just like information that you have to deal with. So yeah. So yeah, so Ted,
Yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up. Please join me. I don't think we have time for questions, but if you have some, maybe our speakers can stick around a little bit and talk to you if you'd like. And thank you all for joining us this summer and today at our very last session. It's always so bittersweet because we're happy not to have to carry ice across the roof, but just have to say goodbye to all of you. So thank you all for being here. Please do take leftovers. Please take soda. Please sign in if you didn't. Please fill out your service tracking forms. Please RSVP for Thursday, and please stay in touch with Philly. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. That was really yeah, I liked it. I got an email about it. Somebody, I don't remember who it was.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's yeah. Yeah. I think Where are you working? I'm at Schreiber. Oh, okay. Yeah, so, but I'm very interested in and so I'm not sure if that's going to work perfectly for what Sherry said. I know. I'm meeting in Chicago next week. Where are you meeting there? Just Schneider.